Hello, this is Greg Scully. I'm with 501 Commons and welcome to this session of GiveBIG P2P strategy. And it's with Ariel Glassman. So I'm with 501 Commons. 501 Commons is a nonprofit. We serve other nonprofits. We have a wide variety of services I want you to be aware of, from our back office HR, finance, and data admin, to having help with your board or facilitation, strategic planning, and so forth. And we've got a wide variety of other tools and tips on our website. So please go to www.501commons.org. And without further ado, I want to introduce you to Ariel Glassman, who's going to be giving our presentation today. And so please join me to welcome Ariel. Ariel, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Greg. Hi, everyone. I'm Ariel Glassman. There's a few familiar faces in the room, so nice to see those of you I've worked with or met before. I am a fundraising consultant, and I have been a fundraiser for about 20 years now. I've been a consultant for the last 10, and this year I changed my solo consulting practice into a consulting agency called Common Great. You can see the list of things we do here. What we're talking about today is right up my alley. I have always been a grassroots-oriented fundraiser, always been in love with digital donor relations and online fundraising. And I am not only someone who's been a staff member and a consultant now, but I'm also a board member who has done peer-to-peer fundraising on behalf of the board that I am on. So I know of what I speak from many angles today, and hopefully you will find the synthesis of all of that very useful. Before we begin, take a moment to absorb our land acknowledgement, please. Both 501 Commons and I would like to acknowledge that where we are broadcasting from and where their offices are from are on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish and Duwamish people. And so we wanted to make sure we acknowledge that before we began today. So what are we talking about today? This is our agenda. So there's sort of 7 key topics. The way I teach, we're going to burn through our content pretty quickly because I want to leave time at the end for questions. I think a lot of times that's where we see the most nuanced things come out, the thing that somebody, I didn't even know I should ask that. Oh, I learned something. So I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for that. So we will just dive right in. We're going to talk about what it is, why you should do it, in terms of like, what are the advantages of doing that strategically? Is it right for you as an organization where you're at and with your resources right now? If you're going to do it, who should be your peer-to-peer fundraisers? How do you set them up for success? We'll zoom in on a really critical part of that support, a toolkit, and talk a little bit about evaluation, and then it'll be Q&A time. So the very first thing, and this may seem obvious, is what is peer-to-peer fundraising? And you can see a nice visual here provided by Classy. Thank you, Classy. That it is essentially the way to take an online campaign and turn it from something where somebody lands and can give to an organization to where people can sign up as ambassadors for your organization and have their own page and really actually have a little home kind of landing strip for their network where they can send the people they know specifically. So the idea here is it's really kind of replicating in an online environment what we know to have always been the classic way that we fundraise, and particularly that we find new donors, which is the best source of new donors are the donors you already have. So this really takes that and makes a concrete practice and tool out of it in a very real and tangible way. So that's what we're talking about here. The idea is that you'll have your GiveBIG page and that you might have your board members or other folks, we'll talk about that, who will create their own what we call child pages for that mother page and be off to the races helping raise money for you. So why should you do this? It is an investment of time. So I want to make sure people understand strategically what this can bring to the table for you. So number one, and I think first and foremost on a day like GiveBIG, when like everyone and their mom is emailing. I mean, if I don't have 60 emails in my inbox when I wake up on GiveBIG day one, like I will eat my foot. It's a lot, right? And you're going to get drowned out. And many times you don't want to get lost, right? Even a great subject line when you're looking at like 60 emails is a lot. So what happens when you bring peer-to-peer fundraisers into the equation is they're reaching out using their personal tools. So what are you more likely to open? An institutional message from an organization or a personal note from your friend. One of them is going to land in your inbox and one of them is going to land in your promotions tab to start with. So the idea here is that this is a tool that can help you distinguish yourself, can actually get to people amid all the noise and clutter. And that's a great tip for things like Giving Tuesday and year-end campaigns as well. If you are working with software systems or using Washington Gives for those where you can have those kinds of peer-to-peer pages. Number 2 is a little bit close to what I already mentioned in terms of this is creating a concrete tool. We are always saying our board, oh, organize your networks, bring them to the table, sometimes literally with events. You know, we need you to introduce people, but we often do not have a concrete tool for that. This is that and can serve as that. I'd also like to name that it has multi-generational appeal. You know, there's a lot of differences in different demographics about how they prefer to be connected with, how they prefer to give, how they prefer to be stewarded and receive information and how much engagement they want. But there is sort of a universal enjoyment of peer-to-peer fundraising. You know, boomers love it, millennials love it. There's data that shows that this is a strong strategy no matter the demographics you're working with, which means it's a great thing, I think, for everyone to experiment with before you write it off. Fourth, new donors. So giving days historically are like a crazy good source of donor acquisition. And when you add a peer-to-peer layer in, it strengthens that even more. So for example, if you've made a development plan for this year and one of your big goals is acquire more new donors, this might be a really good reason to invest in the peer-to-peer aspects of GiveBIG. Again, you're going to find your new donors from the networks of people who are already giving to you in great part. And there's some data that supports that GiveBIG in particular has been gangbusters for donor acquisition in the past. I'm actually really excited about the new Mighty Cause platform because it has so much more robust reporting. I'm really actually curious to see what more data 501 Commons can bring out of the back end of this when all is said and done to understand even more in depth how this peer-to-peer aspect might play into new donor acquisition. So finally, I want to name that it's actually a cultivation tool as well for existing donors and volunteers and some other folks who we'll look at when we're talking about who are your prospects to be peer-to-peer fundraisers. Even if they don't say yes, you have asked them, you've invited them, you've made them feel like an insider. This might be a reason to be a little more generous with, you know, who you're reaching out to for peer-to-peer fundraising rather than being more conservative, just because it's another engagement point and people can feel free to decline and they won't be mad that you asked. But wanting to make sure that we look at it there and not just what can it do for me in the short term with GiveBIG and new donors and new dollars, but long term, it's an engagement point for people who are very engaged with you already. Okay, so that's why I recommend that people strategically pursue peer-to-peer as part of GiveBIG. But is it right for you? Right? I want to explore some factors about your organization and where you're at right now that might kind of tip the scales one way or the other. So one of them is, have you ever done a peer-to-peer campaign before? Now, if the answer is no, that's not like immediately like do not pass go, do not collect $200, do not do peer-to-peer. It's just something to think about. When you've got experience doing this before, it can be, you know, doing it especially on a scale like GiveBIG versus say peer-to-peer that happens over the course of a whole year-end campaign. It's kind of like putting on an old jacket that already fits. You know how to do it. And that might be something that smooths your path into doing it here too. Do you have the internal capacity, time, resources, et cetera, to invest in success? One thing that is true of peer-to-peer fundraising, and like this is not field of dreams. If you build it, they will not come. You have to ask people and you have to support them. So it's worth going, am I slammed with 8 million things right now and working till 8 o'clock every night? Hopefully not. But adding peer-to-peer on top of an already really robust workload, depending on what you have going on this year, it can be a challenge. So again, that's not to put anybody off of it because we're going to talk about the easy ways to set yourself up for success and to kind of leverage whatever capacity you do have, but it's worth thinking about. I always want to be careful about work-life balance when we think about adding new things onto the plate of nonprofits that are already really stretched. Do you have a solid base of volunteers? And again, if the answer is no, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but this is basically like a built-in audience for this. We actually find a very strong correlation between people who give of their time and energy and who are willing to not only make donations, but find that middle place where they're actually volunteering to help you get donations. So if you got some volunteers already, you've got a built-in pool And again, sort of a nice glide path into doing this. And are your people tech savvy? This is one of those things where, again, I think the Mighty Cause platform, I've been in the back end, it looks pretty easy. And I think for the most part, people wouldn't have any problem using the system at all. And I think it is actually easier than the one we transitioned from last year. But if your audience is very untech savvy, they may be coming at me with a lot of questions, or that might just simply warrant, like, you're going to need to invest in a little bit more training and support for your audience if they're not super tech savvy folks. So this is the big question. I think everyone goes, but who's going to do this for me? A lot of people will do this for you. So I want to talk through some of these categories that are like really not necessarily low hanging fruit, but people whose engagement points show that they are aligned towards seeing you as part of their life. And when we're thinking about donors, there's donors we want to ask to do this. There's also a whole bunch of not donors we want to ask to do this necessarily, or people who may be donors, but that's not necessarily why we're talking to them about it. But when we're thinking about donors, what I want you to think about is donors who are loyal, who've shown commitment, and who are consistent, rather than somebody who's got a big gift or several big gifts. Having large financial capacity does not an energetic, excited, enthusiastic, and prepared fundraiser make. And we have, again, a lot of data showing that the most successful peer-to-peer fundraisers are people who have skin in the game and who are aligned with your organization in the long term. So if you're pulling data from your database, focus on that. And, I would take a look at that next line, RFM, recency, frequency, and multiplicity. How recently did someone give? Are they a frequent donor? Do they give multiple times a year? The answer to all those things is yes. They've got the makings of a great peer-to-peer fundraiser, kind of foundationally. Board and volunteers, we talked a little bit about each already, but this is, again, a great tool for helping board members fulfill their obligations and hopefully leverage whatever excitement they have about fundraising for your organization. And it's a nice way to handhold into the process for folks who might be a little tenuous about it. If you have other kind of satellite groups that orbit your organization, I've got examples here like an advisory board, a young professionals group, things like that. Those are people who've stepped into an arrangement where they're saying, I connect to this organization. It matters to me. I'm in an advisory or some kind of engaged role. Those would be good people to ask. Kind of going back to the idea of, are your people tech savvy that we looked at on the last slide? People with strong personal and professional online networks are an especially good candidate. You might have someone who fits a lot of these other criteria, but like they're not on Facebook and they don't want to email people, right? That all of a sudden, the classic tools that we're using, they're kind of a fizzle out for that person. So again, not to say that we don't want to encourage people who, aren't necessarily like super online themselves, but for the most part, it's probably a higher ROI on those people. Another one is sponsors. This is one that we haven't talked about in the past when we've talked about peer-to-peer, but it would be really intriguing to think about if you have a lot of corporate relationships. Some of them might show up at your event, although virtual events have been a little weird for the normal, hey, we're a corporate sponsor, we're bringing a table of 10. That proposition really got turned on its head during virtual. So I think there are some organizations lurking out there who have some of that energy from the employees of their sponsors that is yet untapped these last couple of years. Might be a great thing to go to those sponsors and say, hey, we will set up a page for you. Will you market this internally to your employees so they know that they can support this cause? You don't have to do much else. Here's a one-page toolkit, right? I think especially if we don't over-process our corporate partners, you might see a pretty awesome upside to asking someone, I'll call them corporations or people, asking someone like that who's got such a big built-in audience and who has a history of those people showing up and helping you to make a page. And a lot of times, if you target those companies that have matching offers as well, then all of a sudden, not only are you getting gifts from the employees that might make up for lack of engagement at an event, but also you're bringing in the matching funds to complement those. And finally, staff. And I will say that it's very important to note here that this is optional. There are a lot of power dynamics and equity challenges right now with staffing in the nonprofit sector. And I think it's awesome to offer staff the opportunity and offer to support them just as much, but do not pressure your staff to do this. Definitely make it optional, make it exciting, but I've seen organizations being like, staff have to do this, and it really is not appropriate. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Overall, you can see my final tip here is quality, not quantity. We've talked about a lot of groups. These may not all be right for you, but honestly, you will do better if you have 5 really engaged peer-to-peer fundraisers than if you have 30 kind of fundraisers, right? So think about the quality of the people and really target in on some of these characteristics, as opposed to going en masse and just trying to get everybody you possibly know to do this, because it's actually not the right step for everyone. And you will have an easier time supporting a smaller number of more effective peer-to-peer fundraisers if you are tight on staff capacity internally. Okay, so we've talked about why you should do this. We've talked about things to think through about whether it's really right for you at this moment. And we've talked about who could become a fundraiser. So let's say we successfully secure those folks. How do we set them up to succeed? This is that piece about taking some staff capacity that you need to invest to support your fundraisers if you expect to see return on it. So there's, I think, 7 tips I'd like to share for this. So the first one is a support toolkit, which we will look at in depth in a few minutes, what could go into that. And I will also note that historically 501 Commons has had great examples available in the GiveBIG resources that you can really just swipe and adapt. Tips, templates, some screenshots, especially for maybe audiences that aren't super tech savvy, for them to actually see the process laid out, can be really helpful. I would also hold an info session and record it for anyone who cannot attend. So if you're recruiting people, hold just 30 minutes online for Zoom, or, basically, pick 2 30-minute sessions that are sort of like GiveBIG peer-to-peer fundraiser office hours, throw a Zoom link in there, make sure people know that you're there to support them. And then if you record it for anyone else who can't actually show up, you can just send them the links. Some people really learn better, and this might feel like over processing, but some people will look at a thing like a toolkit and be like, I can't process this. And so we want to make sure we're accounting for different learning styles and the ways that people absorb this kind of information if we expect them to act on it. So establish one point of contact inside the organization for your peer-to-peer fundraisers. This is, I think, more important from the peer-to-peer fundraiser perspective than necessarily it is to you internally. Internally, we know that multiple of your staff members may hold kind of primary relationships with some of these people. But in terms of managing the process, who to go to for support, try to make it super easy for that fundraiser and be very, very clear on your team who that person is, and make sure that they are equipped to do that and that they do have some time set aside for it. And I think that the more we make peer-to-peer fundraisers work to figure out what to do for us, the fewer of them will do it and do it well. Goal setting. This is the thing that I think makes people the most kind of nervous. They don't know how to calibrate a goal. And, especially if they've never done this before, or they don't have a history of significant giving, or they don't know, they've never tried to access their network for fundraising before, they'll probably have no clue. So I suggest in your toolkit, offering them a default goal, and then a couple points of critical thinking about why you might want to lower or increase that, just so that they have a little bit of a sense of how to go about making that decision. Similar to the notion of having the video sessions, using more online tools to create community, right? So we talked about drop-in virtual office hours or a recorded presentation. You might even be able to make like a listserv on your email that's like, peer-to-peer@teamtix.org. That's the board I'm on, product placement. Where it actually, you sign people up as they sign up, and you email that one list, and boom, it goes to everyone. So then you're supporting people at scale, and you can kind of rapid fire, easily distribute new tips, new information, well-timed follow-ups, etc., to people or your peer-to-peer fundraisers. And if you've got a big active Facebook following, I've even seen people make Facebook groups where they invited their peer-to-peer fundraisers to join that private group. And that was a place where they deployed tips, info, et cetera. And it, fomented conversation between their fundraisers and got some cross-learning between the people who signed up to do this. So it kind of created a 2-way street as opposed to just a 1-way street from the organization to the fundraiser. That is A+ level relationship development and fundraising, where you're not sitting at the center of a wheel hub like a spoke, and everybody who's participating is only connected to you. This is how you turn it into a spider web, where all of a sudden you're delivering on community connection to the people who are involved, and they're actually seeing in real time, again, like-minded, similar people to themselves being involved and engaged, and fun things can come when that happens. Incentivization. So, this is somewhat transactional, but to a certain degree, these things can motivate people. And so if you can gamify or do some recognition, that can often help, not necessarily, yes, with this year, but also the recognition that comes from announcing who these people are is another good thing that sets you up for next year's recruitment as well. So you could incentivize or provide like a gift certificate or like the kind of item you might do a raffle for. It's totally going to depend on your community, what this thing is, but you could provide something for, you can provide something for people who raise the most money, people who brought the most donors to their page, people who got to their goal the fastest. What I would say is, I've got a little asterisks here on who had the most donors. I think from an equity perspective, I like that option the most because peer-to-peer is not necessarily something where you're going to see a super high average gift. And we definitely see a lot of first-time donations that tend to be smaller than what people's ultimate capacity might be. And I just feel like, again, even sending the message that you value participation from a long-term perspective and not just short-term dollars is an important message to convey to your community. And it's okay if you want to incentivize who raised the most, you can actually do both. Why not offer two things? So I don't like to over rely on those pieces, but they're a nice add-on around the margins in terms of getting people motivated. And this is sort of more a strategy tip, which is activate peer-to-peer during early giving. So not only do we want to give our peer-to-peer fundraisers the most runway possible for follow-up, 2 days is not a long period of time, but when you add that 2 weeks on that, all of a sudden you've got room for a series of 3 emails to your people, things like that. And the reason we want to do this is that if you took the last workshop, and even if you didn't, I'll explain this really briefly. There's something called the goal proximity effect, which means that the closer humans are to a goal, the more other people want to help them, or the closer you are to your own goal, the more motivated you are to get to that finish line. And what this means is that as we raise more, we actually accelerate towards that endpoint. So when the sooner you get super close to your goal, the quicker the remainder will come in. So when you do early giving, and this is why I recommend you invest in early giving, all of a sudden you're starting essentially that like 2-day giving period way closer to your goal than if you didn't have that early giving period. And so basically straight out of the gate, you're more likely to get to that acceleration point faster and thus get to your ultimate goal faster, which leaves time for cherry on top fundraising. What if you make your goal on day 1? Awesome. Day 2 is, can have a different feel, or you can actually do different stuff with it. So activate them. Don't just give them that 2-day period for a variety of reasons. Bring them on into our early giving because it's going to benefit the campaign as a whole. Set yourself up for success. So there's how do we set them up for success? And we started with that because we want to center their experience. But how do you set your own self up for success? Number 1, prep your CRM. You're going to have data that you're going to want to append into transactions like who your peer-to-peer fundraisers are, because next year when you sit down to do this, I want you to be able to go in and run a report and say, hey, Little Green Light or Bloomerang, show me all the people who are coded as this custom field peer-to-peer fundraiser for GiveBIG between these dates, right? Poof, all of a sudden, we're tracking on that. And I think it's important to put in your database. Let's say you're, have someone entering a gift 6 months from now, all of a sudden when you're entering that and you see, oh yeah, they were a peer-to-peer fundraiser for us. Maybe that's something you personalize their acknowledgement with. Oh my gosh, we were so touched when you did a peer-to-peer fundraiser for us for GiveBIG, and now you've given, wow, this is super generous. Thank you for being part of our family. So again, I'm sort of a CRM nerd, and so I'm always going to think about that aspect of it because it really is your source of business intelligence for future efforts, not just limited to GiveBIG. Coming back to the idea of designating one person as a point of contact, that is really primarily aimed at the fundraisers, but it also will make things easier internally. Not that we don't want to encourage collaboration internally, but being very, very clear, like who is responsible for managing this aspect. And that's for your staff. For your board or your volunteers or sort of the, people who circle the organization but are not staff, finding a champion from that group who will kind of lead. Maybe you've got a board member who will rep this at your next board meeting and really encourage people and say, let's do a virtual coffee if you're nervous and we'll set up our pages together. Shake the trees a little bit like that and provide some leadership by example. And that can help you not have to bear all the weight of recruitment. And in terms of content, we actually haven't touched on this yet. Like all fundraising, you want to be telling stories. So this is actually sort of a tip for GiveBIG overall, not just peer-to-peer. But peer-to-peer is one way that we can manifest the narrative about why people should give, share an individual story or two. You know, we can put media on the GiveBIG pages. You can have people click videos and things like that. So get started on that stuff early because it can creep up on you and it'll help everything, not just the peer-to-peer. Okay, we're coming into the home stretch. Let's talk about the toolkit. This could be 1 page long. I've seen it much longer as well. It all depends on sort of the scale of the effort. Like if you are the Public Library Foundation and you're raising like 50 grand from peer-to-peer, like go whole hog on the 6-page bonanza, right? Like you're doing it at a scale and volume that warrants that. Otherwise, I would say, let's look at these items, and some of them are must-haves, but otherwise you can sort of pick and choose from this sort of like a menu based on what you think your people are going to need the most. So what I would say is just a little bit about the what, when, why of GiveBIG. Yes, it's been going on for 12 years now, I'm thinking. There are still some people out in the community who are not that familiar with it. Like maybe you've got a board member who's never been on a board before, and so they're not used to like the rhythm of this. Make sure they understand why it's important. Here's the thing, especially if you're having a slightly longer version of this, it's not just like, oh, we have this giving day. Share your goals for the giving day. I'll come back to the example of, hey, our development plan says we really need to focus on donor acquisition. So when that's the why I'm talking about, because if you can share with people, we're doing this because the long-term health of our fundraising program depends on bringing new donors to the table consistently year after year. That's more motivational than we're trying to raise money, right? All of a sudden they see themselves as part of a purpose, a shared purpose. And that's when people really start to align. So I just wanted to explore the nuance of why. It's a little more layered than it looks there. Share your goals, dollars and donors, right? We want to raise X dollars, we want to raise X donors, and a little bit of guidance on who to ask, when and how. That's the kind of thing that honestly will come out the best in sort of a video session where people can ask questions like, hey, I'm a lawyer. How would you, my network is this. How would you, explore who might be right for me to ask? If you can provide some general guidance, that's great. Tips and examples for their profile. So you can actually create a template in the back end of your Mighty Cause system for GiveBIG that shortcuts this, in a really easy way for the fundraiser. But we do want them to tweak. We want someone to land on their page and say, oh, that's why Ariel is fundraising for Teen Tix, not why Teen Tix exists, right? It's really, they're giving to you and sort of secondarily the organization. So give examples for that. And there's actually 2 sections. There's a short story that's like just a few sentences, sort of the headline, if you will. And then there's a longer section where you can have more depth, more detail, etc. So create some examples of that thoughtfully and distribute them. And, I would say be on point to help people do this profile crafting. That's probably one of the things that your fundraisers will come back to you the most and say, oh, I need help with this. That and sort of sample text for email and sample social posts. So I think it's that writing piece that feels like a barrier. Like, what do I actually say to my network? The more you can tear down that barrier and give people something that is super easy to just like tweak and send or tweak and post, the better job they're going to do for you. We already talked about suggested goals and guidance for setting goals. I think that's important to put in here. And also just like give them the links, like make sure that don't make any assumptions, make sure people know your website, where your GiveBIG pages, your social profiles, so that they can make sure they're resharing organizational communications, especially in that 2-day window. And describe any incentives or gamification or sort of those transactional pieces we talked about. Again, that's marginal. Many of you may not do it, and that's totally fine. But if you do, you're missing an opportunity if you don't put it in the toolkit. Okay, this is our last topic, and then we will dive right into Q&A, which is welcome on peer-to-peer topics as well as anything else GiveBIG related. I want to make sure we are closing the loop and evaluating your peer-to-peer fundraising. So some suggested metrics are the number of peer-to-peer fundraisers you have. YOY here means year over year. So track that and go, well, how many did we have last year? Okay, that went up or that went down. Same thing with the dollars that come in the door through your peer-to-peer fundraisers. How much did you raise and how much does that compare to what came in through peer-to-peer the following year? If you see both of those things going down, you might want to examine the strategy a little bit more or try to figure out or suss out why this year didn't succeed as well as the previous year. Counterpoint, if it's exploded, it's really worth looking at figuring out why, because then you can lean into that success point in the future and use it to help just, again, increase the ROI in this effort. I also think it's not just about zooming in on the peer-to-peer dollars. What slice of your overall GiveBIG take came in through peer-to-peer? So it's not just how effective is peer-to-peer on this sort of like flat out generating revenue, but like contextually, is this worth it? If you're raising $100,000 on GiveBIG, I'm just using big numbers because they're round. I recognize that most people here are not raising $100,000 on GiveBIG. But if you're raising $10,000 on GiveBIG and 1,000 of it is coming through peer-to-peer and it's not that many donors, I might question whether that's the right thing for you to keep working on, or identify inputs you would have to put into the situation next year in order to bring that up, because you might actually be wiser on the, mass marketing if that's really what's succeeding for you. And then we talked about acquisition, not only as a probable goal for most of you in your annual fundraising plans, but also something that Giving Days are really good at. So let's make sure that we understand the number of new donors that came through peer-to-peer, and even the number of donors, from past who are retained because they made a peer-to-peer page or they made a gift on someone's peer-to-peer page. I would also suggest that you look at new donors as a whole to your GiveBIG campaign and then identify, again, the slice of that came from peer-to-peer. You might see that not a ton of your dollars are coming from peer-to-peer donors, but you might see that 75% of the new donors generated from the campaign were. Now that's a different story when you think about, is this worth it? Because all of a sudden you just saw that this is an acquisition machine, even if it's not delivering a ton of revenue in the moment. So there's some connections between that. I don't want you to look at these things in isolation, look at them together, because they're going to tell you a very specific story that's going to help you succeed more in the future. Finally, send out a brief survey. Like I'm talking like a 3-question Google form, anonymous, to the people who did this for you, and just say, what could we have done better? And take that feedback to heart when you get it and implement it next year. Okay, let's open the floor to Q&A. I have not been watching the chat or anything like that. And I'm going to stop sharing screens so we can all be more in community with each other during this part. But don't worry, you will have access to the slides after everything. Awesome. And yeah, let's establish a norm here. It looks like Samira, you've got your hand up. That is an awesome way. Let's all proceed. Put your virtual hand up if you want to talk. Although, you know what? There's multiple pages of us. Oh, okay. I can see it on the participants tab. Samira, go ahead.
Hi, first of all, Ariel, thank you for putting on this workshop. This was super helpful. I feel like much more prepared to kind of get started on the peer-to-peer aspect. My question is, I do want to engage people through peer-to-peer during early giving. When is the best time to email them and reach out to them to get them prepared before early giving starts?
I would try to secure your fundraisers 2 weeks in advance. At least make a first round effort. Like, we're right at the time. So 1st of April, that's a Friday, and Friday is where important emails go to die. So maybe Monday the 4th. But it's gonna be a little bit, you're gonna have to follow up with people, but the sooner they know, the better. Cool. No problem. Okay. Let's see, we're going to lower your hand. Okay, good.
Feel free to type a question into the chat box. Oh, there's one right now.
Yeah.
They mentioned that we have a good example for templates for P2P. We'll get a link to you. I'll do that right now. Go ahead, Ariel. Other questions?
Awesome.
Please.
Yeah, and there's no silly questions. I really want you guys to feel comfortable asking something that you might feel is basic. That's what we're here for. Larry, you've got your hand up.
I hope you can hear me okay, and I apologize if I'm a little froggy this morning. I am wondering if y'all happen to have a video that you can provide that we can then forward potential those peer fundraisers to refer them to the video as like a sort of training, but more easing their anxiety and concerns about, well, I have to do what? How do I do? I have a board and a volunteer base of varying technological prowess, if you can read between the lines. And I think fear is a barrier for them. And so rather than have me and all of the folks from the, dozens and dozens and dozens, if not scores and scores of organizations kind of doing, giving that message and easing folks, if y'all were able to provide that kind of message, it would be useful for probably thousands and thousands of people. Does that make sense?
I'm gonna, if you don't mind, Greg, I know I'm not a 501 Commons representative, but I want to jump in with my thoughts regarding to that. The thing is, Larry, is every organization's different. So, my hunch is that it will be not only more effective for you to provide that messaging in whatever format makes sense, whether it's a virtual board meeting or you're meeting in person, or it's an email and it's the toolkit, than for sort of any one overarching organizational perspective to talk about peer-to-peer fundraising from an abstract place. My hunch is that would not actually prove to be very useful in terms of defeating what I'm seeing here as sort of fear-based barriers. Because they're going to go, well, I don't know anything about this as it applies to my organization. So I know it's probably not the answer you're hoping to hear, but you need to take that layered step of customizing a message like that in whatever format for your board with your people specifically.
I think that, and I understand what you're saying, because as a peer-to-peer fundraising is the power of personal touch and influencers, power of influencers. I certainly, I was not meaning do the work for us. All that communication with the peer fundraisers, as much as being part of that process with a fairly generic, super short video that helps ease their concerns. We'll definitely have to talk about, the mission and why, and absolutely, positively. I wouldn't want anyone to try to handle all of that, but just a fairly generic thing, even just a few headshots of a few different folks who were interviewed after the fact, like from different organizations. Wow, I was scared about this, and it turned out it was really easy. Blah blah blah, etc. And I think that could be potentially useful to a lot of folks. Thanks for considering anyway.
Sure. Okay. Let's see. I got a question in a DM. Any advice on how to encourage passive board members to participate in peer-to-peer fundraising? I do think that peer leadership from someone else on the board could go a long way there, a little bit of peer pressure. But I would also say that in my experience, if somebody's really resistant, don't make them do it, right? Like, I would not make this mandatory for your board, because somebody who is really not interested and not going to pull their weight and just be another person you have to manage as part of the process, it's actually going to detract from your ability to support other fundraisers who are interested and who want to do it. I would look at this like the rule of thirds with almost anything on any board. 33% of people are going to be like, yeah, I love that thing. 33% are going to be like, meh. And 33% are going to be like, no. And for those people who are sitting in those last two categories, I don't think it's actually worth it. Focus on the people who are excited and who can see the value and are not giving you resistance in any way.
So Larry's got another question there, Ariel.
Sure. Sorry, I can't see all the hands.
Larry, is that a new question, or did you just leave the hand up? There you go.
No, that's an old stale question, and
There we go. Okay.
but thank you.
All right. I've got a question for you then, Ariel. So, how do I keep our my fundraisers motivated? How often or how much should I stay in touch with them after they've had initial training?
I think it depends on your scale, because the smaller your group is, the easier it is to develop a person by person follow-up rhythm. And you'll probably know those people better anyway. But what I would suggest is that you give them, if they've said, yep, I'll do this, I would say check in like 2 days before to make sure that they've actually set their page up. Because if not, then you still have time to help them or do it for them. And the morning of early giving, I would say, great, now's the time. We've unleashed the Kraken. Go forth and fundraise. Here's that toolkit again. Here are some tips we talked about in here's our video session again, and go for it. And I might encourage them one more time the following week. And then on the day of GiveBIG itself, or the day one, that's another one where right away, and perhaps even the day before, to say, remember, tomorrow's our busiest period. The tide is rising for the whole community. Everybody's going to be thinking about GiveBIG. This is the perfect moment. So please remember to share at least once per day over the next 2 days. Remember to follow us, share these posts, etc. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to hit people over the head. And frankly, what I would encourage you guys to do, if you use Outlook or Google for your email systems, both of those systems offer ways. Outlook through just a general email merge, and Google through a variety of extensions like yet another mail merge, where you can actually do a customized email to people at scale that will actually land in their inboxes. So what will result is, 50 emails at a time that actually look like they came from you, because they did, and they will actually literally be in your sent box, that are going to land, as opposed to like a MailChimp or some other way to do it. So if you're working with a high volume, I'd encourage you to think about ways to communicate at scale that will actually get to people. Save yourself some time, because that is a big component of what it takes to manage this. And there are going to be people who are, squeaky wheels, who want more, who will respond to those emails, and like, great, let them self-identify as super interested in doing this, and then take that ball and run with it. You will know from your initial engagement efforts, like who's really into it. And I would just encourage you to really lean in with those folks.
Great, thank you. It looks like Meg Alley has a question.
Hi, Meg.
Hi, Ariel. Thanks for doing this. So I was talking to a board member just a week or two ago who is normally a very enthusiastic peer-to-peer fundraiser. She's wonderful, but she's feeling a little worried this year because for the past 2 years, she hasn't really been getting out, meeting a lot of new people. There's been very little turnover at work where she does a lot of her peer-to-peer fundraising. And so we were kind of trying to brainstorm some ways we can get our board fired up about this, even if they're feeling like I've been asking the same people over and over for the past 2 years. At some point, they're gonna not want to hear from me anymore. So what are some ways we can kind of, I don't know, think outside of the box to find some new donors, or some good ways to approach the people we've been asking for the last 2 years?
Are you asking specifically about how you guys as an organization find more peer-to-peer fundraisers? Or are you asking about how a peer-to-peer fundraiser who feels like they're in that position where they've tapped things already?
Yeah, more how we can work with our peer-to-peer fundraisers who are feeling like their people are tapped out.
Yeah. Well, I think for folks who are coming to you with those concerns, I might, set a half an hour calendar appointment and go through what they've done the last couple of years and see if we can pick out potentially untapped constituencies that they maybe haven't thought of. Again, the way we think of it as professionals and people who are engaging in this work all the time, some of those things that we take for granted may not occur to our individuals out there in the world who are doing this work on our behalf. So I guess at that point, it's sort of more like, I don't have a universal answer for that one. What I will say is tearing down, for people in that situation, any way you can tear down any barrier to participation will help set the stage for that. But you really need to dig deep into their networks and sort of what's been going on with them for the last couple of years to get, I think, an effective answer for that person.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I wish I had a better universal answer for that one, but everybody's approaching this with a little bit of a different mindset or maybe a different fear. And so it's hard to kind of one size.
Yeah, it just feels a little different this year, but I think we can work through it.
I mean, honestly, I'm in the same position. I was doing some peer-to-peer fundraising for the organization that I'm on the board of, and going through that, I was like, oh yeah, there's a ton of people I haven't connected with. So number one, they're not alone. And it might actually be helpful for them to hear that they're not the only person sitting there going, oops, I haven't kept my network up. Is this going to work? Because I think part of this might feel like getting in a weird place, but like there might be some shame associated with that makes feelings about this process complicated for those people. So I think you can unpack some of that with them and create a safe space for them to be like, oh, I'm a bad girl. I didn't actually, hold these relationships up. Okay, great. Now we know that. Let's problem solve together.
Yeah. Thanks, Ariel.
Sure. Alice has her or their hand up.
Yeah, hi. I just going off of what you said, Ariel, about speaking of like barriers to communication. So like I've had a similar experience with our board members or people who we've asked to do like peer-to-peer fundraising, and sort of something that like we've been doing is like sending out email updates that they can just like copy and paste and then send out to their network. So like doing things like that, is that sort of what you mean when you say like breaking down those barriers for communication? Or what does that mean exactly, I guess, is my question.
Sure. So, if we looked back through some of the presentation, I think we identified some things that feel like they could be barriers, like not knowing what to say, not knowing who they should be talking to or thinking about in terms of asking. Those are sort of more the barriers that I was thinking about. But what you're talking about is sort of a frequency and a rhythm of communication. And I agree with what you just said. Like in terms of that structure where you're really, you've got a consistent sort of small bites pieces of advice rather than like big overwhelming stuff. That actually might make it easier for people to go on the journey of figuring out how to do this with you. Like toolkit, great. It's got to all be in one place in case somebody's at their computer at 12:30 at night going, okay, last chance I have to email my people. But there might actually be people who will follow along better and be more engaged if you're landing little stuff that's very easy to digest more consistently.
Yeah, we just thought of it as like ways to do little touches as just like gentle reminders, just because we have had, we've found that that's more successful with our board members and people that we're working with.
Yeah, the wall of text can be intimidating, which is again why, especially if you're new to this, I don't recommend having like a super heavy duty toolkit. Again, if you're a really star performer on peer-to-peer already, then I think it's worth the investment. But it's true that sometimes being overly comprehensive about everything, again, there are some people who will just like, okay, I can't approach that. So I like what you're suggesting for that reason. Larry has a question in the chat. Is it inappropriate to try and incentivize peer fundraisers participation? At a very high level, no. At a nuanced level, it depends. So we talked about some of the gamification and incentivization, rewarding or, gift certificate or a raffle prize type thing to somebody who raised the most or, brought in the most new donors, et cetera. What we can never do is really compensate them financially. So I would avoid, like, what we've talked about already is totally fair game. I think incentivizing them beyond that in terms of finances somehow would not be appropriate. Does that answer your question? Great. Awesome.
Other questions, folks? Anything in the chat?
And remember, we're fair game for other questions too. We're not doing the comprehensive webinars at 2 different kind of complexity levels like we did last year. So if you're not planning to attend the stewardship one next week, this might be your last shot to ask any other questions that are hanging out in your brain about GiveBIG to me. So I want to encourage us to use the 9 minutes we have left. Ooh, can I reiterate the key dates? Asks Anna. Yes, I'll screen share again. And all of this you should find in your back end as well. So I'm not the only source of this info, but key dates are that early giving starts on the 19th. The last day to register and publish your page is April 15th. And then of course, the big 2-day event itself is May 3 to 4. Awesome. Kim asks, were you going to put that resource link in the chat? I didn't see it. It may be something that needs email follow-up, Kim.
Yeah, I'm going to send it afterwards. Sorry about that. I didn't say that. So thank you for the question. Yeah, and slide deck presumably will be part of that. So you will have access to, the written out version of everything we've talked about today too. Samira, you got your hand up again.
Yeah, to clarify, the last day to publish your page, that's for us as an organization, nonprofit, not for peer-to-peer funders to set up their fundraising page, right?
I believe that is correct. I believe somebody could set up a peer-to-peer page like the morning of GiveBIG or even day 2 of GiveBIG if they wanted. I think that deadline is really about you guys being signed up to participate, full stop.
Yeah, you could always add somebody after the 19th. That's fine.
Yeah.
So,
Great.
any other general questions about GiveBIG? Fundraising questions, strategy? You've got Ariel. Any questions at all? All right. Well, we do have support for GiveBIG on the website. You can always use the toolkits that are there. I'll be sending a follow-up message to those folks that are on this call right now. And also there is a help function there that you can communicate with folks on the team to be able to help you if there are some sort of a technical challenge or issue or question, that sort of thing. So on behalf of 501 Commons, again, I want to thank everybody for coming and really appreciate your participation in GiveBIG this year and look forward to seeing you at future trainings. Please do stay in touch with us at 501commons.org. And Ariel, thank you very much for your training, and any parting words for these folks?
Go forth and conquer. Better to try and experiment than now I think, than always wonder whether it could have been right for you. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I love building community through these workshops. So would love to connect with each and every one of you. Yeah. May the force be with you. Literally, May the 4th will be with you on GiveBIG.
Thank you, folks. Have a good day.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.